Today we are going to identify different sketching and shading techniques. We are going to look at our two artists, what we focused on in our mood boards. So I have black and white images here, and you'll be able to recognise these images from our illustrator in the Cortex called Shaun Tan. The second artist is called Van Gogh, and I've printed these images in black and white because we are going to experiment and explore different sketching and shading techniques, and we are not going to be looking at colour. So what do you notice is the same in Shaun Tan's artwork and Van Gogh, and what do you notice that is different about the two artists? So I've now labelled these images up so we can clearly see this side is illustrations by Shaun Tan and this side is our artist Van Gogh. To begin with, we are going to look at the similarities, and you can use your mood board from last week to help you. I notice that the subject matter is the same, and what we mean by subject matter is what does the artist focus on, what are they drawing, what can we see in the images. So my similarity is the subject matter, and both artists have looked at fruit. Stick to that there. Another similarity is the colour palette. Although in sketching and shading today we are going to be using pencils which are going to have variations of grey, we can go back to the original artwork and we notice the colour palette is the same. So moving on and looking at the sketching and shading technique, focus on the same piece of fruit in the different images. So here I'm going to look at this piece of fruit by Shaun Tan, and then I'm going to look at this piece of fruit by Van Gogh. They have used the same sketching technique and they are called hatching, which all involves different lines, and they've also used cross-hatching. And we are going to experiment and create our own examples next. So what do we notice that's different in these images? I notice, by concentrating and looking at Shaun Tan's artwork, his shading is a lot smoother. Although he has used the hatching and cross-hatching sketching style, he has blended to make the areas appear smoother, so the lines aren't as visible. In Van Gogh's artwork, his lines are harsher and more obvious. So if you look at the background here, you can see a series of lines in all the same direction and then crossed over again. His lines are also further away to make this more obvious. So let's write our differences down. So Shaun Tan is smoother, his shading is blended. And in Van Gogh's, the harsher lines, it's more obvious style. and the lines are further away. So in our first activity, we are going to look at different sketching techniques. So if you have your page in your books horizontal for me, so it's like landscape, and we are going to draw a square. And within the square, we are going to practice our first technique. And this is called hatching. So hatching involves a series and rows of different lines, and they have to all face the same direction. Doesn't matter which direction, so we can have horizontal lines, we can have vertical lines, diagonal, etc. But once we've chosen, we have to keep them the same. So I am going to choose horizontal lines, and I am filling up my square with horizontal lines. And our next technique links to hatching, and it is called cross hatching. So the first part of cross hatching is hatching. So because I've done horizontal lines here, I am going to fill my box again with horizontal lines. And to enable it to become cross hatching, we have to cross over those lines. So now I am changing the direction, and I am crossing them lines vertically, like so. Let's draw another box. Our next experiment is called stippling. And stippling involves dots and circles to create our technique. So I'm going to start off here, and I am making lots of circles, and you'll see the closer these dots and circles are, the darker the area is, and as I move the dots apart, the lighter the area is. And you'll notice with this technique as well, it's quite time consuming because you have to repeat over and over again all these small circles, but the results are worth it. So I'm working now a little bit faster with my pencil. Just filling up. There we go. I haven't finished all of my square, but that gives you an idea of the stippling technique. Our next box, we are going to do a series of short dashes. So a dash is a small line, and when we go back and look at Shaun Tan and Van Gogh's artwork, you'll be able to identify the technique they've used with short dashes. So a dash, again, is a small line, and we're going to keep the same direction. So I'm filling my box up here. With lots of little dashes. And this time I've gone for using a horizontal. So this time I've gone for using a diagonal line to fill up my box. And you also see it doesn't matter if my dashes touch or overlap, but the direction is very important. So our next box, we are going to look at contouring. Contouring means following a particular shape, and it's mostly effective with 3D objects. And you are following the direction. So if we was looking at a curved shape, all of them curves, the lines would follow that direction. And the closer we have our lines, the darker the shading is, and the further apart, the lighter it is. So an example can be, as we've been looking at fruit, an orange, we would follow the contour and the lines around the orange. Our next technique, we are going to look at scribbles. I'm sure a lot of you have done this before. We are going to use our pencil and we are going to scribble, which involves using our pencil in all different directions. We are rotating our wrist and we are filling up our box like so. Scribbles. Another style, we are going to look at zigzags. So zigzag is an up and down shape like so. When we create our zigzags, our lines cannot overlap, but we have to follow that shape. So you can see how I'm recreating the zigzag to fill my box. There we go. Our last technique, we are going to make up a shape or pattern ourselves. I am going to look at the number 3. You can choose a number, you can choose a letter or a shape. And I am going to fill that whole box. And the reason why I've demonstrated with the number 3, because that movement of creating the 3, we are repeating it and we are filling that box just like all the other experiments. And by doing that, we create our final sketching technique. We're going to move on and look at shading techniques. So we have 2 different pencils. You should have a 2B or a 4B pencil. So on the side of the pencil, it will tell you its value there. So this one's a 2B, and this one is our H pencil, and it says 3H. And we are going to explore where we use the different types of pencil. So our H pencil, H stands for the hardness of the pencil, and the B equals how soft the pencil is. So that is the charcoal and the graphite inside the pencil. Our B pencil is good for darker areas, And our H is good for lighter areas. So when we are experimenting with our sketching technique, when all of our lines are close together, so when we are creating the darker shades, we use the B pencil. When our lines are further apart, so it is the lighter areas of our drawings, we use the H. We are going to look at the hatching technique, which is the example that looks at the lines. And we are going to create a series of boxes going from dark to light. So first of all, I'm going to number our boxes. So we've got 1, which is going to be our darkest, and 6, which is going to be our lightest shade. And I'm going to start off using my B pencil for the darkest shades, and I will then swap over and use my H pencil to create the lightest shades. So for box number 1, we are going to use the style hatching. So I'm going to repeat the horizontal lines, which are going to fill this first box here. And my lines are going to be really close together, because we need to have it from a distance. It looks really dark, so this is going to be solid black from a distance. And it doesn't matter if some of our lines touch, because we are creating the darkest shade, the darkest tone we possibly can. But I've used my pencil in the same direction, and I have completed box number 1. And in box number 2, it's still going to be fairly dark, but it's going to be a little bit lighter than box number 1. So we are going to use our lines, our repeated lines, but our lines are going to be a bit further apart. So in number 1, our lines were, I should demonstrate this with 2 pencils, were touching each other, like so. And in number 2, there is a tiny gap in between them. So let's fill out number 2. And as I'm making horizontal marks, I'm using the side of my pencil. So you can see from a distance, this is the darkest, this is slightly lighter. So in number 3, our lines move a little bit further apart. And then we are halfway going from dark to light. I'm putting the same pressure, I'm just moving the lines. And it's here, I'm going to swap over from my 2B pencil, and I'm going to use my H. That could be H or a free H. So in number 4, our lines are even further apart. And they are still going to be horizontal, but they're just wider. Number 4. Number 5. Even further apart. Number 6 is the lightest, so from a distance you should barely be able to see that. So that's our gradient. We've gone from dark to light, using the hatching technique to shade our boxes. We're now going to complete our second box. So I've made another box here which has 6 different areas in, and we are going to explore cross hatching. So cross hatching again is similar to this, but involves the lines being crossed. So in number 1, I'm going to use my B pencil and repeating, putting them lines really close together to demonstrate hatching. And I have to change direction and bring them lines vertically, but still have them really close together. So that's our darkest square, and it's the same rules for number 2. So I'm repeating the step above with my horizontal lines a little bit further apart. To demonstrate hatching, and I am now vertically further spaced out, completing number 2. So moving on to number 3, I am repeating the steps from above. So my horizontal lines, and now I am coming down, and my vertical lines are a bit further out. So the difference we can see from number 1 to number 3, these square shapes, these grid shapes, are clearer than in number 1. And I'm going to swap over now to my H pencil, and I'm going to complete number 4. So they're even further spaced out, and number 5, and finally number 6. So them squares, if you've done horizontally and vertically, should get bigger as you move through.